Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Eli Neumann, Vice President of Worldwide Sales Engineers at Tenable. Ellie is also a member of our 2022 PSLC Council. The topic of today's episode is Sharpen the Saw. With PreSales Collective, we're always talking about continuous improvement and ways to ensure that we, as pre-sales professionals, are growing in our day-to-day. Ellie has created a concept called Sharpen the Saw that he has brought to his current organization and previous organizations, which is all around continuous improvement through competition. We are going to discuss what Sharpen the Saw is, what are the core components of it, and why and how it has become an integral part of Ellie's organizational DNA. It is fantastic to hear Ellie, who has a wealth of knowledge, talk about continuous improvement and how he is enabling that within his organization. And this topic came up because Ellie answered a question in the Slack during the Executive Summit. So we know that this is an event format that people want to institute inside their own companies. So enjoy today's episode and think about how can I bring this to my organization to promote and emphasize continuous improvement. Today's episode is sponsored by Consensus. Scale your pre-sales organization with interactive video demos. Experience an interactive demo at goconsensus.com. Ellie, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you?
Doing well, doing very well.
It's great to have you on here. We were talking about this previously. I am just marveled by your bike riding goals and aspirations right now. I mean, that is unbelievable. Can you tell the community a little bit about what we were talking about in terms of your bike riding goals for 2021?
The historical thing is I've been a bike rider for years and years and years. About my first racer in college, which I actually just donated about 3 years ago. So that thing lasted a long time. Yeah. So last year, of course, with COVID, I was doing a lot more biking. There was more structure to my day. And I started thinking about, I wonder how many miles I do a year. And I came up with some estimates. So, well, let's shoot for something bigger. So we started off 2021 with a goal of 7,000 bike miles and quickly realized I was going to well surpass that. So we went to 9,000 bike miles and we surpassed that on December 21 per schedule. I am a little analytical. And then I decided, well, I'm just going to take the last 10 days and make it to 15,000 kilometers, which is equal to about 9,320 miles or so. And we will wrap that up probably tonight.
That is unbelievable, Ellie. And I bring that up, one, because it's an amazing achievement, but there's so many people who start the year with goals and aspirations and things they want to accomplish. And so I love that you put that out there. You said, hey, I'm going to figure that out. And you went and accomplished it and actually kept raising your goal. So that's really great out there. So all the bike riders and all the people that love to ride will probably be messaging you in the PreSales Collective Slack.
Well, hey, I'm in sales. So I have a commit. I have a stretch. I hit my stretch.
I love it.
I'm into overachievement, overattainment right now.
Ellie, it's a privilege to have you on the PreSales Podcast because you are one of the original members of the Executive Council, a group that was started quite some time ago that brought pre-sales professionals together. And so it's an honor and privilege to have you on here. And you're now one of the members of the PreSales Leadership Collective Council. So we're super happy to have you. So tell me a little bit about the genesis of the Executive Council.
It had slightly different names back then, but 2003 or 4, some people who are listening will know this name, but Richard Campione, who was at Siebel at the time, and I were sitting around. We were very tight vendor-partner relationship, integrated solutions. And so Rich and I were talking about all these things, the issues of running pre-sales orgs. And Richard said, you should start a group. I was like, I should start a group. So we did. And you guys won't even know the names anymore, but Richard from Siebel, Tim Dilley from Informatica, and so forth. We had JD Edwards, PeopleSoft. So we did this and we'd meet quarterly for a few years. And we added members and it got actually kind of difficult to do that and what I was in the process of doing professionally at the same time. And it sort of petered out just a little bit. And then Valerie Wallach and some folks from Salesforce called me up a few years later and said, hey, you okay if we rekindle this? And so they took it. And Valerie and her team kicked it off again. I can't remember what year that was, but it was probably in the range of 2007, 8, 9, something like that. But anyway, that's running. That thing, I think that group has a significant number of members now, probably a number of companies, 60, 70 or so. And then we sort of came together with you guys.
Oh, it's amazing. It's so great to hear because really the genesis of PreSales Leadership Collective was that group. And I know that Yuji Higashi actually got engaged at an event about 2018. And so when we were growing PreSales Collective and realized we needed to do a separate group for leaders, that was the group and the idea. We said, hey, let's find out, let's connect. And obviously Cindy Goodwin-Sack has come over as a PreSales Collective advisor. So love the work that you've done. And we're honored to be able to continue the traditions.
Yeah, no, Cindy's a rock star. I worked with her for a few years at Cisco. Very good choice there. Overall, people are looking for, how did others solve this problem? The generational changes over time cause the emotions to be different as time goes on, and you just have to brainstorm it.
Not to talk too much about this, but I think this is our whole genesis of why we exist, is because I believe that there's so many people solving the same problems and actually are seeing the problem from different perspectives. And when we kind of get out of our company four walls and we start talking to other people at different companies, that's where the innovation's happening. That's where the problem solving and the different perspectives lead to innovation. And so that's our whole premise, is to bring the walls down, get people connecting and talking, and watch the innovation that happens. And I think especially as it relates to this pre-sales profession, which is becoming more and more and more important as buying and selling is changing, that's what we want to be collectively working on.
Exactly.
So Ellie, let's talk about you. Let's talk about your pre-sales career journey. So what got you to where you are today?
Interesting enough, I got my degree at the University of Michigan in computer engineering, and I did software development for about 6 years. Towards the end of those 6 years, I was actually leading a group of developers. I had to switch countries and come back to the US. I was overseas. And I landed at a company that back then was about under 1,000 employees, called Computer Associates, which most of us know as a behemoth. We all knew each other, a pretty small company. And I landed this thing called sales engineer, which I had no clue what it was. I figured I'm young enough to give it a shot. And I never looked back. I ran a team of SEs at CA for about 12 years, and then I kept on going from there. It seems that I had a decent knack for leading people, not managing so much. I'm more into the people side of it. And I never left the SE side of the house. I was asked a couple of times to go into sales, and I decided to stick with what I seem to do well at, and I still enjoy it. So I'm still here.
I love that journey and love that perspective. As we talk about the people side of things, this is why today's episode exists, is that we were having the executive summit. And during the executive summit, we had the Slack channel going for all the participants. And I remember somebody bringing up a concept when it came to enabling and empowering your people. And you responded with Sharpen the Saw and explained Sharpen the Saw. And I remember a couple members in the community saying, oh, that needs to be a podcast. We need to do that. So just like most of the things of what we do, the community drives the content. So I'm excited to talk about this concept of Sharpen the Saw with you, Ellie.
Sure. It's an iterative process. And what we do is we take regional individuals. So SEs we don't fly people all over the world en masse, right? So each region or each group comes together and presents to their peers. The presentation could be a corporate pitch. It could be a demo. It could be a whiteboard. It could be Q&A. It's just practicing what we do in the field. And we do it in front of our peers because that's quite stressful. And if you've done that, then you won't have any issue with the customer side, right? The highest level of concept simply is present whatever it is the group chose to do, no more than 20 minutes or so. Even if you have to get cut off, you stop, and then you get immediate feedback from everybody, and the next person goes. And that way, there's no emotional snowball effect. There's just blunt, straightforward feedback. We take notes, and then we bring those back on the next round. And then each time, it just gets more and more sophisticated. Not for everybody, right? If I have a new hire in the region, the new hire will start with something small and check with everybody else.
I love this concept. One, I'm a huge fan of feedback and just-in-time feedback, right there, unemotional, give it to people straight. But I love that you've talked about different components like the corporate pitch or the whiteboard. What are those different pitches or demos of Sharpen the Saw?
So oftentimes, like I said, if it's a new hire, let's say, for example, right, we may ask them to just do a presentation on their own personal hobby. You're totally comfortable with the subject matter, breeding dogs, making wine, restoring cars, whatever it may be, just talk about it. But from that point forward, we focus in on a few things. And like I said, we get iteratively more sophisticated and we add skills each time. So you might do a demo just to show technical knowledge of a given product. The next time around, you might go a little bit further. And now we're going to really focus on presentation skills. I don't believe in teaching presentation skills, by the way. That's going to sound odd, but I just think you put money into it and people tend to always fall back to their old habits. So we keep it very, very simple. As you know, James, I'm a minimalist, right? What I like to do is just say, you know what, let's just focus on the fact that you're presenting with nothing distracting. That's all I care about. Your clothes are not distracting. You're not fidgeting with things. You're just non-distracting, and therefore people are paying attention to what comes out of your mouth. So we just do that level of presentation skills. And then from there, we move up into softer skills. And all this builds on a pyramid that you and I've talked about in the past. But you are welcome to pop me into those layers. But we'll add that as well in terms of, do you understand how to converse with people who have different personality profiles? Do you know your personality profile and therefore what you're inclined to do? We use DISC. I've used that many, many years across 4 or 5 companies now. A little bit on neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, really minimal. That's a theory that takes years to master. We just focus on audio-visual kinesthetic. Do you know who you're talking to, what type they are?
I really love the pyramid model. And I like that you talked about even starting with a hobby from the people who are new to the organization. So how do you get the people that are being pitched to give that feedback? What kind of directions given to the audience to make sure that they're set with expectations, to make sure they're delivering quality feedback to the person presenting?
What we usually do is we'll direct that audience and say, today we're focusing on the following. So all the rest of it, we've either covered in the past or we just don't want so many things. But in some of the groups, they'll give them a sheet that has some topics on it that you don't necessarily rank them per se. You could, but we don't necessarily do it that way. It's more a matter of, style. What do you want to say about the style, right? Body language, how was that? So we do give some guidance. Everybody's allowed or given the authority to say whatever they want about the individual that presented. You know that you're going to be giving somebody feedback who's about to give you feedback. So you probably will tone it down just a bit. But I'm a pretty blunt guy. I kind of grew up in parts of the world where people are very straightforward and just straight honest and transparent. And that's the guidance we give. This is not emotional. We're running a business. We're trying to improve how we perform as a business. This is not really personal. So just factually put things down. And we do take note and bring it back the next round. Say, hey, by the way, James, these are the 3 things that we agreed you should work on. Let's just a quick reminder. Now go do your presentation.
That culture of creating feedback is really huge and really critical to happen. And I think it builds trust within teammates and peers and allows people to be vulnerable. So it is really important. And I want to dig into some more specifics because I know that a number of people want to be able to institute this in their organizations. You've talked about a pyramid. You've talked about the expectations. The word that you've used to me before is the symphony of skills. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So if you look at the pyramid, which I have put out there periodically, I'm happy to share it more. The visual is that the bottom layer, which is the widest one, is all about technical skills, the product skills and industry knowledge around your products. The next layer is the presentation skills. Well, as I said, even though it's a fairly wide layer of the pyramid, I really keep it very, very simplistic. I've just seen too many years of people just fall back on the bad habits. So we just focus on just a few things. And then above that is really the critical one. It's a bit of a combination. Maybe some people would like to break it out into separate layers, but that layer has 3 things in it. It has unique business value, or UBV, for those who remember the old TAS model. UBV is all about unique business value. What differentiates you from the competition that addresses that customer's desired business outcome, which is a term Cisco used for a long time, maybe still does, but attach the differentiating capability to that customer's desired business goal or technical goal if it relates to the business. So how do you build that out? And that way you're not demoing it. Let me show you all the 23 buttons that are on this one menu drop down. That's not what we're about. So we focus on that. Stay to the point, stay on a unique way to show the business. NLP, like I said, is one part of that layer, which basically says you should know if the person you're talking to is an audio, a visual, or a kinesthetic. And the way you answer questions should be adapted to that. It's pretty easy to figure it out. It's a very basic part of neurolinguistic programming, or NLP. If I were to ask a question as a CIO, can you show me your reference accounts in this area? You said show, that's visual, put up a logo slide. If I said, can you give me a feeling for your reference accounts? You're kinesthetic. So I need to give you a story of how people were very, very upset and unhappy. And then we brought our solution and now they're happy, happy, happy. And then finally is DISC. And DISC is a big deal for me. DISC is all about knowing what your personality style is. There's nothing negative about the 4 types in DISC. everybody's got some element of the four. But if you know what your dominating personality type is, and you figure out how to identify with some level of accuracy what the person opposite you is, you will know how you should react to them, how you're inclined to react to the question, and then how you should react to the question. And that'll make a massive difference. Those are the three major layers of the pyramid. And then above that sits business technologists. And essentially what I'm saying is that if you've hit all of these skills, the technical, product, industry knowledge, presentation skills, and then the soft skills I mentioned, you are now a business technologist. And when you do sharpen the saw, you're practicing a symphony of all these skills. How do you pull all of this together in a very elegant way that is subconscious? It's not something so obvious. You're not in their face. But in essence, I like to say the customer doesn't know why they like you. They just know that they like you.
Ellie, I love the breakdown. That is fantastic. And I really appreciate you sharing that. For those listening who want to actually see some of that content, presalescollective.com/Slack. If you're in the Slack community, you can go to the content channel. And actually in the new member portal that we're going to be rolling out, we'll have a tab that says resources. So we'll make sure that that's available for folks. One of the things that I'm thinking about is how often you do these and with what groups of audiences. But in a conversation we had previously, you mentioned that this is not just a pre-sales, but an entire sales organization competition/sales organization-wide initiative. Is that correct?
So for the first few years I did this, and actually I don't change companies that often if you look at my LinkedIn, but when I have switched companies, it always starts off with the SEs are doing this on their own. And of course, the eternal question is, how come the reps aren't here? And I kind of use what I call the Dyson effect, meaning I advertise to the sales leaders what we're doing in hopes that the vacuum I created sucks the TMs in and they join. And they do. So, today I'm at Tenable now for about 4.5 years. And most of the regions, when they run Sharpen the Saw, which, by the way, to answer your other question, runs quarterly and things get in the way. So I just ask, hey, at least 3 times a year, right? The TMs will come in and they actually have a lot of fun with this. So the TM, we don't have one-to-one pairings in all around the world, but the sales rep will come in with the SE. And oftentimes the sales rep will kick it off with some opening, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then do a handoff to the SC. We want to watch that handoff. And the sales rep will get the feedback as well on their portion of it. But I tell you, those sales reps love it. And the sales leaders, there are parts of the world where the sales leaders insist that the sales reps are part of this exercise. So it works out great because they get to practice together and with different sales reps and different combinations.
I really appreciate that. And I actually really am happy to hear that there's a lot of sales reps taking part of this type of activity, because I believe that when a seller is well-versed, they're more dynamic, they're more dangerous, and makes a better pair with your pre-sales counterparts. So I like that engagement is happening. It's organizational wide, but it's taken me a while to get to this question, Ellie, but there's probably the most important question of this is why? Why do you do this exercise throughout your organization?
When I was younger, I was in an acting group and choir. So you find that rehearsal makes perfect, right? Practice makes perfect, or whatever. There's different versions of that phrase. And so that's one part of it that drove me to this. The second piece is certainly when I first came out of software development and became an SC back in the old days, I will still remember to this day that I was presenting. I was so nervous. I started sweating. And in those days, you used overhead projectors. Can you imagine when you drip a bead of sweat on an overhead and then try to wipe it away? Those of you that are my age will know what I'm talking about. I kept thinking about there's got to be a way to do this so that you just work yourself towards something you can prepare, and it's stressful because you're in front of your peers. Get through that and you practice these skills, then you can take that symphony of skills and roll it into a customer or partner type interaction. And it's a whole lot less stressful to do that. What you find is the individual SC and sometimes the reps are not so pleased to have to do this, but I always get the same feedback at the end, which was that was probably one of the best things I've ever done. It's really helped me a lot. I still don't like it, but I will do it because I realize, So that was the reason. It's like, just keep practicing and keep improving. I was an SE, CAU managers were working SEs as well, and so forth into my other companies. And you just realize that when you bring those skills together, number one, it just makes the whole job a whole lot more fun. And two, it results in successful sales.
That's why we do this at the end of the day. And so, as you talk about this and the different types of components that exist in Sharpen the Saw, I would have an assumption that there's a bit of magic and innovation that comes out of this process in small regional teams and probably across the globe. Is that a correct assumption?
It is a very correct assumption. So what we do in order to get the cross the globe aspect into what you just mentioned, I think you were sort of alluding to it, but the focus here is not tech skills. Most SEs, we hire them because they're technically astute. It's the soft skills that are tough. And then the question is, how do you use those? And so when you work always as a region only, you tend to see your own 5, 6, 8, or 10 SEs, right? So what we do is we run competitions that are global. Usually we run a US one, and it's like the best of the West and the beast of the East. And then the two of those come together. We pick out the top 1 or 2 for North America, and then we do the same globally. And we publish the top 3, which I believe have always had a sales rep involved. And so everybody gets to watch the short videos we do. We put them up on a high spot, which internally we call it Prime, but it's a high spot system we use. And the key thing there is you start to watch what other people do that you never thought was a good way to project a point. Oh my God, the way that person ran that demo, I would have never thought to do that. I'm going to use that one, right? The phrase you used was so impactful. That is the phrase for that part of the product. And so that stuff is what comes out and it gets shared across the globe and gets used over and over again, which is, of course, a good thing.
It reflects back a little bit of an example that we did with PreSales Collective is we ran demo days, a global demo competition where we put people together in random groups of 3 and had them create a demo video by giving them a prompt. And it was unbelievable to see. We had 180 people involved across a 2-month period, how everyone took different approaches to the prompt and the iterations, because we had multiple rounds. You're right. Like people taking things that they saw in round 1 or they heard in round 2 and incorporating that to round 3. And that end product for those top 3 teams, it was unbelievable. I loved it. You're right. There is something magical that happens there when you're hearing how people are positioning things that maybe someone didn't think of. And then again, that's where that innovation happens. I love the Beast of the East and the Sharpen the Saw championship components because it really does move the needle forward for the organization. You talked about how it scales, right? And how you make this part of your DNA. I'm curious, how do you get your executives and your leaders to take this seriously? How do you make this part of what they want to do? Because, at the end of the day, this is probably for the people that are in the field, but management has to be on board for this type of initiative to be successful.
That's a really good question. It kind of leads to what I mentioned earlier, which is sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get the sales reps involved with the actual activity. But the way we did that, and at the current company, I do remember we started this off in 2 locations. If I remember, it was California. This goes back about 4 years, but California and the UK. Those 2 locations decided, you know what, we're only going to invite the sales leader in just to watch. And that's what they did, right? And then at the end of it, I said, so what do you think about joining us, doing a presentation with us? And one of the things that I had done for a while is when I take part and I actually sit in on these, I will try to be the first presenter, right? So you kind of role model it. You take the feedback, no problem. I'm not an expert at everything either. But we did that exact same thing with the sales leaders. So the SE leader, the sales leader were the first ones out of the chute to say, we're going to do a presentation, give us feedback. And then from there, it just went, right? The sales leaders like, this is crazy. We should all be doing this. So otherwise, as a sales leader, you don't necessarily know how your sales rep is actually handling a meeting. You don't even know if they can. So as SEs, we've probably said it many times, I go into the meeting, the sales rep introduces themselves and hands it right off to me immediately within 120 seconds. And so this way, a sales leader has an opportunity to say, you know what, at least I should know the reps could actually carry the conversation for the first 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever it may be.
That's an important aspect of sales generally with me is that I feel like sales leadership, salespeople need to have a point of view and they need to have the respect and continuity that the customers have to allow that dynamic duo between the SC and the AE to be as effective as possible. I like that you talked about you leading from the front, your leaders going first, showing that, hey, we're going to put ourselves through this as well, because I think it does resonate through the organization. And I'm curious, would you have a biggest learning from this process? Because it sounds like you've got this nailed down. You've done this for years. Is there a biggest learning you can share with us?
Probably the biggest learning is the phrase you and I start off a little bit with here towards the beginning of this podcast, which was the symphony of the skills. I went through this myself. Like I said, I learned tech. I'm not that tech anymore, right? So when I do Sharpen the Saw, I'm typically doing a corporate pitch. That's about as good as I can get. But what you learn is that it all starts to come together when you see it live in front of you, meaning you have some technology around the products. You understand what it means to not be distracting in how you present, how you talk, how you don't fidget. You understand the soft skill. It's very interesting to watch people go through DISC and make an adjustment in terms of how they interact with each other. To me, the biggest learning is getting SEs to see and feel the symphony. When you feel the symphony, it all comes together. It's very impactful. It's almost emotional, in my opinion. And you start to realize that this job, it can be so much fun if I can pull it all together and broaden my mindset, not just to, hey, I know product A, I know every menu button, I've got it nailed down, I can go sell. And it's no, not quite. So I think to me, that was the biggest thing, is understand that the soft skills is really, we said before, it's not always the most natural thing for an SE, but it's probably one of the most impactful things you can do. If I can connect with you on an emotional level that is maybe subconscious. So like I said before, you may not know why you like me, but you like me. If I can get to that point, it is so much fun and it makes this enjoyable and much more efficient. I can do far fewer meetings and get more deals closed at a faster pace. That's just normal.
I really appreciate that takeaway and that perspective, and think about, how the symphony of skills internally make an impact on the customer. That light bulb moment. You said bringing it all together, because this job is hard, but when it all comes together and you put that final product out there to the customers and you see the light bulb moment and they're like, wow, my life's going to be so much easier with this software, this technology. That's really what it's all about.
Exactly.
So Ellie, there's a lot of demand for this. Again, we've seen the conversations in Slack. You've given us a great perspective in terms of what Sharpen the Saw is, how to do it, why to do it. So there's definitely some folks out there that want to incorporate this into their organization and probably aren't sure where to start. What advice do you have for those individuals?
Number one, everybody, leaders certainly should always have some kind of a model that you follow that everybody can understand. It's visual, it's simple. So get the model together. I've explained my model, which I've used. I started back in the CA days, a long, long time ago. Two, I would say, you want to focus on things like, we use Demo to Win from Win Global. I have put all my SEs through that training at this company and the previous two. That is a very business value type focused methodology. And so it matches up with the other things that we do. And I had mentioned in a meeting that we also train command of the message, which is very similar in its structure. I guess the point is, and maybe I'm being a little confusing here, you want to focus on these elements and give them background. So when it has to do with presentation, we don't do any presentation skills training, but at least give people an all hands call, an hour, 45 minutes on non-distracting skills. What is DISC? DISC is, for $30 or so, each individual can have an assessment, which there's a number of vendors out there and you get back enough material to actually understand and learn DISC. It's not terribly complex. Happy to walk some groups through it if you guys ever want to. I'm not a certified trainer, but I have done training for a lot of years. But DISC is important. And if you don't use DISC, there's a few other methods. But you got to just give them the backgrounds to all the different pieces. NLP, I wouldn't even hardly mention it because all we do is focus on audio, visual, and kinesthetic. And there's very simplistic stuff. And then unique business value, which ties into Demo to Win. It ties into command of the message. But in general, the old TAS model, again, we're going to age ourselves here, but how do you get a unique business value across? And take each of these elements, give them the background so they can actually roll into Sharpen the Saw with a level of preparation. And it doesn't have to be all at once, because as I said, you can start off with, give me a presentation of your hobby you're really comfortable with. The next time you'll just do a simple tech preso. The next time you'll do a demo. The next time you'll do a complex whiteboard, corporate pitch. So each time you just layer in elements and keep adding to it. And of course, don't forget the new hires that have to catch up to the group. So the group can still run at a symphony level while the newer contributors can start and work their way through.
That's awesome. Ellie, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I love the conversation. It's awesome to talk about learning and giving back and continuous improvement. Those are all themes that are really important to us at the PreSales Collective. Appreciate you coming on. Appreciate all that you've done for the PreSales community. Glad to have you on the council and looking forward to seeing you continue to give back to the community.
Absolutely. Look, give back and take. I still learn every single day from my peers in the industry, young and old. Absolutely.
All right, Ellie, we'll see you next time. Thanks for your time. What an episode. Ellie is a wealth of knowledge, has been doing this for quite some time. So it's great to hear this concept of Sharpen the Saw. My favorite part is that this concept was brought up in a PreSales Collective event. We say this all the time. The PreSales community is what's driving our initiatives around PreSales Collective. As we talk about Sharpen the Saw, it's really about bringing out the best of each other. And I actually really enjoy the fact that sales reps and sales leaderships are involved in this concept, in this process. Let's face it, sometimes demoing or presenting to your peers is harder than the customers. And this type of engagement allows us to put our best foot forward and be judged by peers who really know what they're doing as well and can provide us feedback so that we can grow and incorporate that feedback. Because again, it's all about continuous improvement. When Ellie said that sometimes you hear how people are positioning or pitching something, and you ask yourself, wow, I've never considered positioning it that way. Maybe I should start doing that on my calls. That is this concept of innovation. This is, again, why PreSales Collective exists. And this is this concept of innovation that exists within our companies. No longer our status quo. Everything is evolving around us. We should be always reiterating and asking ourselves, is this the best way we should be positioning or demoing or pitching? So this competition brings out the best of all of us. And as we talk about, it's the symphony of skills. Pre-sales is a hard job. And let's face it, it's no longer this role of just the technical person. There's so many more components that happen with it because sales is changing. Ellie said this process allows you to feel the symphony. It's almost an emotional and moving moment when you can put it all together. And like I mentioned, the light bulb moment to the customer. We've asked this, what is your favorite part about the job? And a lot of people say the light bulb moment. And that's what feeling the symphony is all about, is when you've honed your craft and are able to present something back to somebody and pitch them and they take a step back and say, wow, this is what we need. This will make my life, my job easier. And that's this whole concept of sharpen the saw and promoting best practices within your organization. And so if you don't do this, I would consider looking into doing this. We had a previous episode with Shannon Trainer Stark, who mentioned her concept of Stark Tank, where people come and pitch innovation. And then those innovative components are brought to the broader organization because that's what scaling and best practice scaling is all about. So if you want to know more about Sharpen the Saw, you can reach out to Ellie in the PreSales Collective Slack. You can also go to the content channel in the Slack, but more importantly, our member portal, which will be rolling out soon, will have a resource tab and we'll put some of the Sharpen the Saw components there. PreSales Collective, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If there's something similar that you're doing, please share it with the community. Share it on LinkedIn, tag PreSales Collective, share it in the PreSales Collective Slack. That is what this community is all about. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please do like and share our podcast. It really goes a long way, and I'll see you next week.